Good day, everyone. We are the Group 2 of B and 1. On behalf of my group mates Angela May Luminoki and Dacian Bisin, I am Card May Vidal, and today we are going to discuss Lesson 7, Neo-Behaviorism, Tolman and Bandura.
And here are the learning outcomes. Explain Tolman's purposive behaviorism. Explain Bandura's social learning theory. And give specific application of each theory.
Before I will formally start our discussion, I will first explain to you the meaning of this picture. As you can see, there are two mazes, Maze A and Maze B. In Maze A, the entrance is in the left part of the maze, and then the exit is in the upper part of the maze. While in Maze B, the entrance is in the upper part of the maze, and then the exit is in the left part of the maze. So if we are going to solve the maze, I know that nana may idea on how to enter and exit the two mazes. So kani nga picture is connected to Tolman's purposive behaviorism. Tolman's purposive behaviorism. Usually, people who worked on the maze activity which you just did would say they found the second maze easier. This is because they saw that the two mazes were identical, except that the entrance and exit points were reversed. Their experience in doing Maze A helped them answer Maze B a lot easier. So meaning, katong picture nga kung ipakita ganiha, mas mapadali ra dyan na to og solve ang Maze B kay na naman tayo knowledge and experience nga gigamit na to gikan sa Maze A. So dali ra jud ang process or dali ra jud ta maka sud og gawas sa Maze B. There are two theories reflecting neo-behaviorism that stands out. Edward Tolman's purposive behaviorism and Albert Bandura's social learning theory. Both theories are influenced by behaviorism, which is focused on external elements in learning. Purposive behaviorism has also been referred to as sign learning theory and is often seen as linked between behaviorism and cognitive theory. Tolman believed that learning is a cognitive process. Learning involves forming beliefs and obtaining knowledge about the environment, and then revealing that knowledge through purposeful and goal-directed behavior.
Tolman's key concepts are: learning is always purposive and goal-directed. Second, cognitive maps in rats. Third, latent learning. Fourth, the concept of intervening variable. Fifth, reinforcement not essential for learning. Learning is always purposive and goal-directed. Tolman asserted that learning is always purposive and goal-directed. He held the notion that organisms act or respond for some adaptive purpose. He believed individuals do more than merely respond to stimuli. They act on beliefs, attitudes, changing conditions, and they strive toward goals. Tolman saw behavior as holistic, purposive, and cognitive. Cognitive maps in rats. In his most famous experiments, one group of rats was placed at random starting locations in a maze, but the food was always in the same location. Another group of rats had the food placed in different locations, which always required exactly the same pattern of turns from their starting location. The group that had the food in the same location performed much better than the other group, supposedly demonstrating that they had learned the location rather than a specific sequence of turns. This is tendency to learn location signified that rats somehow form cognitive maps that help them perform well on the maze. He also found out that organisms will select the shortest or easiest path to achieve a goal. Latent learning. It is a kind of learning that remains or stays with the individual until needed. It is learning that is not outwardly manifest at once. According to Tolman, it can exist even without reinforcement. He demonstrated this in his rat experiments wherein rats apparently learned the maze by forming cognitive maps of the maze, but manifest this knowledge of the maze only when they needed to. The concept of intervening variable. Intervening variables are variables that are not readily seen but serve as determinants of behavior. Tolman believed that learning is mediated or is influenced by expectations, perceptions, representations, needs, and other internal or environmental variables. Example, in his experiments with rats, he found out that hunger was an intervening variable. Reinforcement not essential for learning. Tolman concludes that reinforcement is not essential for learning, although it provides an incentive for performance. In his studies, he observed that a rat was able to acquire knowledge of the way through a maze, to develop a cognitive map, even in the absence of reinforcement.
Albert Bandura's social learning theory. Social learning theory focuses on the learning that occurs within a social context. It considers that people learn from one another, including such concepts as observational learning, imitation, and modeling. The 10-year-old boy Sergio Pilicio did watch Saddam's execution in TV and then must have imitated it. Among others, Albert Bandura is considered the leading proponent of this theory. There are 4 general principles of social learning theory. First, people can learn by observing the behavior of others and the outcomes of those behaviors. Then second, learning can occur without a change in behavior. Behaviorists say that learning has to be represented by a permanent change in behavior. In contrast, social learning theorists say that because people can learn through observation alone, their learning may not necessarily be shown in their performance. Learning may or may not result in a behavior change. Third, cognition plays a role in learning. Over the last 30 years, social learning theory has become increasingly cognitive in its interpretation of human learning. Awareness and expectation of future reinforcement or punishments can have a major effect on the behaviors that people exhibit. Then fourth, social learning theory can be considered a bridge or a transition between behaviorist learning theorists and cognitive learning theorists. How the environment reinforces and punishes modeling. People are often reinforced through modeling the behavior of others. Bandura suggested that the environment also reinforces modeling. This is in several possible ways. First, the observer is reinforced by the model. For example, a student who changes dress to fit in with a certain group of students has a strong likelihood of being accepted and thus reinforced by that group. Then second, the observer is reinforced by a third person. The observer might be modeling the action of someone else. For example, an outstanding class leader or students. The teacher noticed this and compliments and praises the observer for modeling such behavior, thus reinforcing that behavior. Then third, the imitated behavior itself leads to reinforcing consequences. Many behaviors that we learn from others produce satisfying or reinforcing results. For example, a student in my multimedia class could observe how the extra work a classmate does is fun. Thus, students in turn would do the same extra work and also experience enjoyment. Then fourth, consequences of the model behaviors affect the observer behavior vicariously. This is known as a vicarious reinforcement. This is where the model is reinforced for a response and then the observer shows an increase in that same response. Bandura illustrated this by having students watch a film of a modeling hitting an inflated clown doll. One group of children saw the model being praised for such action. With that being reinforced, the group of children began to also hit the doll.
Cognitive factors in social learning. Social learning theory has cognitive factors as well as behaviorist factors, or actually operant factors. There are 5 cognitive factors in social learning. The first one is learning without performance. Bandura makes a distinction between learning through observation and the actual imitation of what has been learned. This is similar to Tolman's latent learning. So meaning, cognitive social learning theory suggests that human learns behavior by observing others and choosing which behaviors to imitate. Behaviors that are rewarded are more likely to be repeated, whereas behaviors that are punished are less likely to be repeated. The second cognitive factors in social learning is cognitive processing during learning. Social learning theorists contend that attention is a critical factor in learning. So meaning, attention allows us to plan or preview, monitor, and also regulate our thoughts and actions. Attention is the first step in the learning process. We cannot understand, learn, or remember that which we do not first attend to if we will not start by attention. The third cognitive factors is expectations. As a result of being reinforced, people form expectations about the consequences that future behaviors are likely to bring. They expect certain behaviors to bring reinforcements and other bring punishments. The learner needs to be aware, however, of the response reinforcements and response punishment. Reinforcement increases a response only when the learner is aware of that connection. The fourth factor is the reciprocal causation. Bandura proposed that behavior can influence both the environment and the person. In fact, each of these three variables, the person, the behavior, and the environment, can have an influence on each other. The last factor is modeling. There are different types of models. There is the live model, an actual person demonstrating the behavior. There can also be a symbolic model, which can be a person or action portrayed in some other mediums, such as television, videotape, and computer programs.
Conditions necessary for effective modeling to occur. First, attention. The person must first pay attention to the model. Second is retention. The observer must be able to remember the behavior that has been observed. One way of increasing this is using the technique of rehearsal. Third, motor reproduction. The third condition is the ability to replicate the behavior that the model has just demonstrated. This means that the observer has to be able to replicate the action, which could be a problem with a learning who is not ready developmentally to replicate the action. For example, little children have difficulty doing complex physical motion. Fourth, motivation. The final necessary ingredient for modeling to occur is motivation. Learning must want to demonstrate what they have learned. Remember that since these four conditions vary among individuals, different people will reproduce the same behavior differently.